Hi, welcome to the bathtub. You know, this is the old masturbator. Call Granny, call the kids. The old masturbator's on. Family friendly. We're family friendly. We have nothing the grandma and the kids can't see. We're talking about, this is the third chapter. We're reading this four long chapters in The Sound of the Fury, one of my favorite novels, and one that looks kind of annoying. It's kind of a daunting book, and it can be very frustrating sometimes. So we're trying to talk a little bit about each chapter, so you can use each one of these when you want to and when you don't. We've already talked a bit about the Benji and Maury chapter, the one about the kid who's brain damaged, and then the second chapter is about Quentin, the boy, and this we're talking about chapter 3, one of the great chapters of all time about Jason. The term tour de force is often overused, but it is a tour de force of just rage and stupidity and anger and humor, because Jason's a bastard, but he's actually kind of funny a lot of the time too. The thing to kind of remember is each passage is dated. So I forget the first one. I think the first chapter of Benjamin, where we flash around in time, takes place principally on the 7th of April, 1928. Then we go back in time to Quentin when he's in college and he kills himself. And I forget the date of that. I want to say 1910 or 12 or something like that. And now we're back to 1928, but now we're a day before the Benjamin chapter. Yes, chapter 6. So when the boy, whose name I cannot remember, Luster's looking for his quarter. In this chapter, we find him get the quarter. So it's the day before. It's got a little. What's that movie everyone loves? Pulp Fiction, kind of this. We're moving around in time a little bit, and Faulkner narratively is always on the ball. He's just always on the ball in this period of his life when he was writing these great novels. I just want to. This is a much easier chapter to follow. So we're meeting Jason, who's the only really surviving member of the Compson family, because Quentin's killed himself, Caddy's run away, and left her daughter, female Quentin, to stay live with the grandmother. And Benjamin has been gelded, has been castrated, and shortly after this, Jason's constantly talking about how he wants to send this poor kid off to a mental institution, which is what happens to this poor kid. And this takes place on the 6th of April. The date, again, the date's not important, except that it takes place just before the first chapter. All right? And there's not too much you need to know. We still have flashbacks in time, so it's all going to take place mainly on this one day, but there will be flashbacks, for example, to the father's funeral and to the time that Caddy comes back. Let me read a chapter just to give you a little flavor of Jason. And it's just the whole passage starts off with a bang, and he's a racist, so excuse the language. In the first opening line, you know who he is. Once a bitch, always a bitch, what I say. I says you're lucky if her playing out of school is all that worries you. I says she ought to be down there in that kitchen right now instead of up there in her room gobbing paint on her face and waiting for 6 niggers that can't even stand up out of a chair unless they've got a pan full of bread and meat to balance them to fix breakfast for her. And Mother says, but to have the school authorities think that I have no control over her, that I can't... Well, I says, you can't, can you? You never have tried to do anything with her, I says. How do you expect to begin this late when she's 17 years old? She thought about that for a while. But to have them think that, I didn't even know she had a report card. She told me last fall that they had quit using them this year. And now for Professor Junkin to call me on the telephone and tell me if she's absent one more time, she'll have to leave school. How does she do it? Where does she go? You're downtown all day. You ought to see her if she stays on the streets. Yes, I says, if she stayed on the streets. I don't reckon she'll be playing out of school just to do something she could do in public, I says. What do you mean, she says. I don't mean anything, I says. I just answered your question. Then she began to cry again, talking about how her own flesh and blood rose up to curse her. You asked me, I says. I don't mean you, she says. You are the only one of them that isn't a reproach to me. Jason's the only good person to her. He treats her like garbage. Sure, I says. I never had time to be. I never had time to go to Harvard like Quentin or drink myself into the ground like Father. I had to work. But of course, if you want me to follow her around and see what she does, I can quit the store and get a job where I can work at night. Then I can watch her during the day, and you can use Ben for the night shift. This gelded, brain damaged kid is going to be in the night shift. Anyway, there's your flavor of Jason from the beginning of the chapter. It sets up a very dynamic narrative chapter, which you shouldn't have too much trouble following. Again, Faulkner, like most good writers, doesn't explain things. So there'll be certain passages that are a little confusing, and I remember being confused by it the first time I read it. But some of the things to remember is we are flashing back in time occasionally, so we'll have Caddy showing up at the funeral of the father, and she at the funeral, one of the really horrifying scenes is she comes and she asks, she's left Quentin to live with the grandmother, and Quentin has and she's given them money, and she's always sending them money. She says, I want you to give her everything I can't give her. I want you to be nice to her. She begs Jason to be nice to this girl, which he will never be nice to her. And she's sending him money, and she sends him like $200 a month. And she shows up at the funeral and she says, "Listen, I'll give you $500. I forget how much, $500 if I can just see my daughter for a minute." And Jason says, "Yeah, just give me the money first. Give me the money, and I'll let you see her." And as soon as she gives him the money, and she knows as soon as she gives Jason the money, he won't ever let her see his daughter. So finally, she gives him $500, and there's a scene where he gets on I think it was a buckboard, and he gets one of Dilsey's family, I think, to drive the buckboard, and he holds the baby up as they drive past this distraught mother who wants to see her child again, and hangs her out there to see her. There's some wonderful scenes, one scene after another. We not always entirely sure what's happening, but you will figure them out. There's another flashback to where Jason comes home and the boy, the brain damaged boy, is moaning, and he knows Caddy's around. And sometimes when they're away, they give this poor kid Caddy's slipper, like a dog. They leave a dog like a dog's the owner's slipper to hold to remember Caddy. And Benjamin also has transplanted some of his affection for Caddy into Quentin, who also sort of cares for him. And there's some really wonderful scenes between, Quentin is becoming like her mother. She's seeing all these men, and she's wearing, like he said, gobs of makeup all over her face. And as Jason says, she doesn't skip school to do stuff in public. She's sleeping with these different men. There's a scenes where Jason has a car. He's basically been stealing from the family and from everybody. There's a number of little pieces in here you'll pick up where he's been stealing money from different people. Most obviously is Caddy is sending out these $200 a month, and after the father dies, Jason's supposed to pass on that money to the daughter. And what he's doing is the Caddy sends checks. She sends checks, and he goes into the mother and says to the mother, "Look, are you going to take this? She's spending this, getting this money from prostitution, probably. Are you gonna take her money?" And what he does, he writes fake checks, gives them to the mother. She tears those up, burns them, and then Jason takes the money and sticks in this little cash drawer that he assembles with saving all this money, which will show up in the last chapter. So there's a lot of narrative things happening. He's also he's speculating on cotton futures. I don't quite understand that, but he's running during the course of the day. He's always looking for ways to make quick bucks. He's speculating on the cotton futures, and he's not getting the messages in time. You don't need to know all of that stuff, but most of the story you'll follow perfectly fine. And then at one point, he's in his car, and he sees Quentin, the girl Quentin, with a man with a red tie. It's all you ever see is he got a red tie, and this pisses Jason off that any guy would drive around town in a red tie. And he starts following them, and at one point he parks his car because they go off into the bushes, and he thinks he's going to catch them at something. And he parks his car, and I think they let all the air out of his tires. I forget. So anyway, I think that's the most important stuff you need to know from that chapter. It's probably more than you need to know. It closes. It's all in this voice. It's all entirely in the voice of Jason. Jason's continuing. He's this incredibly powerfully strong narrative voice, and his anger and his rage is just the brutal intelligence of this guy. He's not stupid either. Is just it's funny. It's actually a funny chapter to be kind of trapped in this nightmarish guy's head. And it's a wonderful chapter. And so is the last chapter of the book. So again, if you've gotten through the first two chapters, this chapter will help kind of solidify what's happening. It will help you remember, if you haven't realized before, it also helps you establish in your mind what has happened to Benji. And we know it kind of reminds us that he was chasing girls coming home from school, and that also Jason wants to send this kid away. And then the mother's total helplessness, her just abject helplessness, and the way they're constantly talking about Dilsey and her family, who basically do everything, as these lazy creeps who just don't do anything but eat their food. They can only stand up if they have food to balance them standing up. And of course, they're doing everything. They do all the work all the time, every day, taking care of Benji and this whole horrible family. Okay, wonderful book. I think if you've gotten through the first two chapters, the Jason chapter should just be a joy, and so is the Dilsey chapter that follows it up. We'll do that, another day or two. I'm reading quite slowly through this book. It's a wonderful novel. Okay, take care. Happy bathing. No pixels. Stay away from the pixels. We're trying to warn you. We're non-tech these days. No tech, no pixels, just us. Okay, bye.